Hello everyone. So this is week one of your cause of illness. So this is all week one of your medicine revision. And what I'm going to do is the same thing that we do every time we do these dual codings, where you guys are going to write down the key bits of information that goes with the pictures as they come up. And we're really thinking about in this video, well, what did they believe made you ill? What did they think the cause of illness was? And it also kind of links to how they diagnosed the illness, how they worked out what was wrong with you. And to start off with this, we need to go miles back. We need to go back to Hippocrates. And Hippocrates came up with the theory of the four humours. And he was writing in ancient Greece, so a very, very, very long time ago. And Hippocrates came up with the idea that the body had four different substances. They were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. And he said that if those four substances of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile became unbalanced, then that would make us ill. Now, that was then added to by Galen. Now, Galen was a Roman doctor, so he was writing about 2,000 years ago. And Galen argued that you could take this a little bit further and that you could use the theory of opposites. So, if you had too much phlegm, then you clearly were quite cold, so you needed to eat something hot. So, he linked this theory of opposites to trying of treatments. So, I'll refer to that later. And these ideas remain for a very long time, throughout the Middle Ages, so for thousands of years. Now, alongside this, people also in the Middle Ages believed that God sent disease. So if you were sinful, if you looked at somebody else's wife and thought, well, hey, if you lied, if you were greedy, if you did broke any of the Ten Commandments, that's being sinful. Then you'd end up being ill. They also believed in astrology, and they'd consult the zodiac man, which is a picture of parts of the body linking to different star signs. So they might say, oh, wait a minute, there's a full moon tonight. That means for a Pisces, oh, you mustn't do anything with your toe today because it'll make you ill. So they linked the stars and the planets to making people ill. So obviously these aren't very accurate reasons for people being ill. They also blamed Jewish people. So because Judaism was a very different religion, these people seemed to be often seemed to be quite wealthy because they were allowed to collect tax. Jewish people were blamed for lots of illnesses. So a great example of that is in Lincoln. The Jewish people were banned from Lincoln and exiled from the country because they were blamed for poisoning a well, making people ill. They never noticed this thing, but Jewish people were still blamed for these things. Now, those things they're what we call supernatural. They're supernatural ideas about the cause of illness. So they're things that are like to do with God, to do with religion. They're supernatural. But there are also natural causes of illness. So one of them is volcano fumes. So they believe that the fumes from volcanoes would be breathed in, a bit like the miasma, this bad air, and that would make you ill. Some people also looked at the position of the planets and they used that to be able to assess whether you were ill. So they wouldn't link it to your star sign, they just look at the planets themselves and think about whether that's going to make you ill. And then finally, they also believed in bad miasma, so bad air spreading illness. So think, oh no, miasma. Miasma is the same thing. So bad air is causing people to get ill. Now, in this time period, all learning happened in the church. And 350 books by Galen were supported by the church. So Galen wrote 350 books, and those books were used for the next 1,000 years for training. And they used these because they fitted with the Christian ideas of there being a God. Now, this is important. Because the church were controlling religion and controlling medicine, it meant there were very, very few dissections. So people weren't chopping up bodies, they weren't discovering and challenging Galen's ideas. And most dissections happened on pigs or frogs, not humans. This meant that there were actually quite a lot of inaccuracies that were still being peddled. People still believed these things that were wrong. And they also had a lot of inaccuracies about the heart. Galen argued that blood was made in the liver, and that just like the fuel in your car, it was used up by the body. That's why they believed you could have too much blood or too little blood. So they really didn't understand the anatomy of the body. So in the Middle Ages, you can see we've got a bit of a problem. They don't know what causes illness. Although they're trying to do something scientific, it's incredibly inaccurate. And the control of the church is stopping progress. So we're seeing very little improvement in the understanding throughout the Middle Ages. Now, things get a little bit better in the Renaissance, but not much. We still believe in the imbalance of the four humours. So we still believe that if you've got too much yellow bile, too much blood, too much phlegm, an imbalance of your four humours will make you ill. So people still believed in that in the Renaissance. They still believed in the idea of miasma. They also still believed in the idea of God making you ill. So these things have remained. And particularly during times of crisis, people went back to the old ideas. So during the Great Plague in 1666, people thought, oh, crikey, this is probably being caused as a problem. It's a result of our sins. So people during desperate times blamed God. They also began to blame witches. So they began to think, oh, there's those people in the village who are cooking things in their pot, like Macbeth. They're there with their cooking cauldrons, forming up stews and things. Maybe they were the wise women who'd offer cures. They started to blame those women for the problems in society, and they were blamed for causing illness too. Now, those things are very similar to what we get in the Middle Ages, but there is quite a big change, and that happens to the church. So in 1535, the Act of Supremacy is passed. Now, this makes the church less powerful because the Catholic Church is now broken away and we get the creation of a Church of England. So in 1534, Henry VIII creates the Church of England. Now that means that a lot of medical advances that were being limited by the church can change. So it allows for things to change. So we get some quite important changes because there's more freedom to do anatomical dissections. So for example, Harvey found that the heart pumps blood around the body. And he found that blood isn't used up, it's oxygenated, and then as it goes around the body, the oxygen is used, and then it returns to the heart in veins. So he found out about arteries, he found out about veins, and he challenged Galen's ideas. And he said, Galen's wrong. Also, we get the idea from called On Contagion, which was published by Fracastoro, which is Fracastoro. And Fracastoro, he said that disease was like a seed in the air. So he said this seed in the air would land on people, or they'd breathe it in, and it would make them ill. Now that's quite an important discovery, because it's almost like the idea of germs, isn't it? So it's linking to miasma, but it's like the idea of germs. Now alongside that, we also get improvements in anatomy because of Vesalius. So Vesalius started dissecting huge numbers of humans. Many of these people were convicted criminals who'd been hung, and he dissected their bodies. And in 1543, he wrote the book, The Fabric of the Human Body. And Vesalius was able to prove Galen wrong. He found out that the jaw had one bone, not two. And he found out other things to do with lobes in the lungs and other areas of the body. And this is important. So the church is becoming less powerful, which allows for more dissections and a greater understanding of the cause of illness. Now there's another person called Sydenham. So Sydenham, and he encourages people to observe their patients. So when you go to the doctors now, you get examined, you have to go, in front of the doctors, and they look at you and they try and work out what's wrong. And that's what Sydenham said. He said we need to observe, we need to watch the patients to try and work out what's wrong with them. And this is all to do with the power of the church going down, which is allowing for more change and more experimentation in understanding the cause of illness. And these ideas spread because of the printing press. So the printing press means that people can read On Contagion. People can read The Fabric of the Human Body. They can read these books that are being published by Sydenham and Fracastoro. So people are able to read these ideas because the church's power is going down. So in the Renaissance, we're getting a little bit better. We're starting to challenge some of these medieval ideas about the four humours, and the church's kind of grip on learning and knowledge is slowly being released. But there's not much progress. We still don't really know what's causing people to be ill. Now that all changes during the industrial period. They still believed in bad miasmas, and they thought that often people were getting ill because of pollution during the industrial period. So think of all those crowded streets, think of Oliver Twist, that's all happening in the industrial period, during the Victorian times. And this idea of kind of bad air was added to by a second one, which was spontaneous generation. Now this is a really weird idea. Spontaneous generation is the idea that disease causes germs. So disease causes germs. Now they thought that because they could see little things wriggling in a microscope, but they didn't realise it was a bit more complicated than that. Now these two ideas together, we start to see the important changes. So these two things get challenged, and one crucial one is John Snow. So you know all about this. So in 1854 there was an outbreak of cholera in London. And John Snow investigated, using a map, which houses people had gained cholera in. He interviewed people, he found out who'd got cholera and who hadn't got cholera. And he worked out that those who were ill had drunk from the Broad Street pump. And actually, eventually, he gets the handle taken off the Broad Street pump. So John Snow works out dirty water causes cholera. So he realises if you drink water that's got poo and wee in it, you're going to get ill. Surprise, surprise. Well worth pointing out, boys, because the number of you lot I have to remind to wash your hands, grim. Now, alongside that, we get the most important thing that happens in the whole of our course. In 1861, Louis Pasteur, famous for milk pasteurisation, discovers germ theory. Now, this is so important. Pasteur finds out germs cause disease. So germs cause disease. And we still use this idea today. That is correct. Germs cause disease. Now, his German rival, Robert Koch, spelt K-O-C-H, he found out that each individual germ creates a different disease. So, the diphtheria germ causes diphtheria the disease. The cholera germ causes cholera the disease. So each different germ causes a different illness. And he also looked at ways of photographing and staining germs. So he'd be able to use agar jelly and he'd be able to show what it looks like. So you know when you're in science and you grow things on agar jelly? It was Koch who first did that, and he did it for TB in 1882. Now the picture there which I put up of the eye, that's because also people started to do more observations of the symptoms of disease. So people started to say, oh, if you're being sick a lot and you go into the toilet a lot and you're really tired, you've probably got cholera. So people started to match your symptoms to your disease that you might have through observation, through watching patients. So this is quite an important time period. There's lots of really crucial changes. They also get more laboratories where they start to test what might actually be causing illness. So we're getting proper scientific work to try and work out, is this causing disease? Is that causing disease? So this industrial period, we're getting a lot of progress. And Koch, again, is really important in that. So we like Koch. Also, they started to look at how X-rays could diagnose broken bones and growths. So you could use an X-ray and it would tell you, oh dear, that person's broken their leg or their arm. You'd be able to work out which bit of the bone had broken. And that was discovered in 1895. There was also a lot of progress in anatomy. And that was mainly because of something called the Anatomy Act, which was passed in 1832. Now that act meant that you had to provide cadavers, dead bodies, for conducting dissections. So during this time period, if people died in charity hospitals, their bodies would be taken for medical experiment. And when I die, my body's going to be up for medical experiments too, because they can have my eyes, they can have my heart, they can have my liver, because it'll mean they can develop new things to try to stop people from dying. So it's very common even today. Now, so far the industrial period has been by far the most important change. Individuals like Koch and Pasteur have led to massive developments, and the government has become more involved by passing acts and encouraging the work of individuals like Jon Snow, although they were a bit reluctant at first. Now, in the modern day, we see lots of really important things about lifestyle and the cause of disease. So let's get started. So one crucial development is in 1951, where James Watson and Francis Crick, so Watson and Crick, discovered DNA. And DNA passes on hereditary diseases. So, for example, if you have brown hair or brown eyes, you may have got that from your parents. But the same thing can happen with diseases, where what your parents have can be passed on through your genes to you. Now, more recently, in the 1990s, the Human Genome Project was passed. And this means that they've been able to map out humans' DNA. And each person has over 3 billion pairs of DNA. And so they've now been able to work out the gene that causes breast cancer. And on the news today, they've talked about a tablet that you can take that will help to treat and even prevent breast cancer. So that's great. They also did a study in 1950 that found smoking causes lung cancer. And Richard Doll was the person who found this out. And he found that 89% of lung cancer cases are preventable. So 89% of lung cancer cases are preventable. And unfortunately, smoking-related deaths cost the NHS £165 million a year. So if you think now, there's lots of things to try and prevent people from smoking. We're going to talk about those in a later video. Also, people have realised that alcohol can cause liver damage. They found out that taking drugs or having unprotected sex can lead to diseases like HIV, hepatitis, and many other really quite horrible diseases. They've also found that too much UV, too much sunlight, or maybe too long on tanning beds, can cause cancerous tumours to grow. So these things, they're all related to your lifestyle, which can cause illness. So too much smoking, too much alcohol, too much sunlight, or maybe a poor diet can lead you to being ill. Now, thankfully, we've also had some technological improvements that have helped diagnose illness. The MRI scanner, for example, can show inside people's brains to find out if they've got a brain tumour or an issue up there. We have endoscopes, which are effectively cameras that you stick up your bum, not yourself, get a doctor to do it, and then they look inside you and work out problems with your intestine. They're called endoscopes. We also have blood and heart pressure monitors called ECGs, and we use those to diagnose heart conditions. And physicians also use blood tests to be able to work out exactly what's wrong with us when we go to the doctors. So what we've seen there is massive progress. We've gone from having very little understanding really about what causes illness to being able to really explain and justify what's making people ill. We've become more scientific, less religious, and much more based on evidence and proof. So next week, you guys, we're going to be looking at treatments. Really hope that was useful. Well done.